Good morning. In recent months, many of us have heard about the refugee crisis that is unfolding in the Middle East and in Europe. Every day, thousands of migrants and refugees are crossing unimaginable distances to reach safety. To date, 12 million Syrians have fled their homes because of conflict. Half are children. What are they fleeing from? What is it like living in a refugee camp? Will they ever go home? What can we do about it? To help us understand the issues and to help us find answers to some of these important questions, three guests are with us today. Marina Jimenez is an award-winning journalist currently at the Toronto Star as a foreign affairs writer. Before that, at the Globe and Mail. She's won numerous newspaper awards, including one for beat reporting on immigration. She has been an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto teaching immigration reporting. She has a master's in the economic history of Latin America from the University of London, and she recently returned from Jordan, where she was covering refugees.
I drop mixtapes, okay.
Maher Azem was born and grew up in Damascus, Syria. He moved to Toronto 10 years ago and later earned a Master's of Engineering degree from Ryerson University. He now works in IT and computer networks. Since the uprising began in 2011, Maher's mission has been to raise awareness about Syria and assist Syrians on the ground through humanitarian education and medical efforts. He co-founded the Syria Film Festival in Toronto, which just finished its widely popular run at the AGO on Monday. Susan Ormiston is a mom and moderator, and as well a senior correspondent at the CBC. Please join me in welcoming our guests to UCC.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your interest in this tragedy that's unfolding. Our leader gave us some of the stats, but a couple more I just want to bring to your attention that in addition to the Syrian crisis, there's refugees all over the world, and today 42,500 people, including children, will flee their homes. Every day in the world, that many flee their homes because of conflict. 10 years ago, there were 38 million refugees in the world. Today, there are 60 million refugees, nearly twice the population of Canada, people with no homes. And this is just the latest crisis, really, when we're seeing the Syrian and Iraqi refugees. I want to talk to these two people because they have personal experiences with this and sort of help you learn a little bit about the refugee issue. Marina, as you know, and you heard, was just back from Jordan and seeing some of the camps around Syria. You've got Syria in the middle, Jordan's down here, so they're fleeing there. They're also fleeing to Lebanon and some to Turkey as well, a little bit further on. Marina, can you explain to me, what's it like for a teenager living in one of those camps?
Well, I mean, if I can just paint the picture, these camps are quite dusty, bleak places. The families started out in living just in tents. They now have caravans, but it's a very tough situation. They have, their bathroom is a hole in the ground. They have electricity only in the evening, and basically they talk mostly about being bored because while there are schools there, the quality's not there, and there's also, because of the sensitivities around gender for many Muslims, many of the girls are pulled out of school at 16 and can't even finish school. So it's mainly you just get a sense of boredom. I met a wonderful young girl who was about 12 years old. Her name was Nisreen, and Nisreen said, "I will go anywhere, I just don't want to be here."
What kind of circumstances were they fleeing?
So most of these people have arrived within the last 3 years since the conflict began in 2011, and in Nisreen's case, her family was a well-to-do family in Damascus with a 3-story house. Her father was a government official, and they basically lived through a bombing attack. So the top 2 stories of their house collapsed, the family fled, and later a lot of them leave with just no more than documents and money and a backpack. And they took a bus to the border with Jordan, and then they cross over. So it's very dramatic. Many of them have seen people be killed, lost family members, witnessed really awful things that they'll never forget.
And have they been in the camps a long time?
Yes, most of them seem to have been there about 2 to 3 years. And what shocked me also, this is just, I don't know why I didn't expect this, but a lot of the girls are being married off by their fathers, and they're only 18 years old, which means basically that their whole ability to get an education and be free is curtailed by, again, this fear that they'll be safer if they're married. I met one woman who was 20, she already had 2 children, and I met a woman who was 40 who had 12 children. Obviously not in the camp, but the sad part is she said to me, well, I feel like my life's over now. Now it's all about my children. And I thought, in North America, 40 is just starting your middle age. You should have another good 30 years left. So it's a really sense of a truncated timeline, and their lives, they live through so much, and there's sort of a sense of lost years of their youth.
We're talking about bringing 25,000 refugees to Canada within the next 5 weeks. You've probably heard a lot about it. Did anybody talk to you about the prospect of coming to Canada?
Everybody wants to come to Canada. I don't think I met a family that didn't. Unfortunately, in the camps, we don't tend to recruit from the camps. We tend to recruit from the urban population. So what was so heartbreaking about Nisarine is she moved me so much, and I thought they would have made such great refugees that I actually persuaded the group that I was with that was doing refugee selection from the urban population to consider this refugee camp family. And I think we managed to get an application submitted. So there's 1% chance of coming to be resettled for all these refugees. It's a very slim chance. So anything that we can do to bring just one more family and young kids is an amazing dream for them.
Thank you, Marina. We'll get back to you in a minute. Maher, you grew up in Damascus. It must break your heart to see what's happening to your country. You left 10 years ago before this recent conflict started. Why did you leave as a young man?
There were really definitely many factors, but just to confirm that Syria is a third world country, I think it's enough fact. There are difficulties finding proper job. A lot of people that are qualified, they end up working, random jobs like taxi drivers or anything, just because, they're not related to some government officials or anything like that. There's some kind of injustice in general, and the high level of education is always pursued outside.
So you weren't there when the uprising that led to this recent migration started back in 2011. So 4 years ago, we've been hearing about the ongoing worsening war in Syria. But can you tell us briefly why you think the young people in Syria rose up?
Yeah, so just to back for 1 second, for over 40 years there has been a repressive regime in Syria. So the silencing the voices has been very common there. There's so many activities that are monitored, whether social or economic or political. So the youth really found, the opportunity to change and to actually speak up in the uprising. They found a great opportunity, and when they saw the regime reacting in, killing and inflicting more violence, and the crackdown was enormous, they were really stubborn, and they became united in organizing demonstrations and strikes and really reach out to the media. And I spoke to many of them in the past few years, and I can see their eagerness to establish an amazing and a new country. And I feel that I'm really obliged to help them in rebuilding and bringing democracy and freedom to their land.
When you talk to your friends, I'm sure you have friends and probably some extended family still in Syria. It's a very desperate place right now. What do they tell you?
It's a bit depressing, really. Some of them, they tend to forget about tragedies and so on and just try to live their life at a certain time. But they dream of going out, really, and it's a bit sad. And the root cause of this crisis is has to be really eliminated so people can go back to their life. And I can't really think of a day where I just don't feel sad for them. They live in a definitely horrible situation where even in major cities, they don't have access to electricity for maybe a few hours only, and even water. So you guys shouldn't take your life here in Canada for granted. and I guess. Yeah.
And what do you think people like these boys and young leaders can do to support Syria and also to bring stability to Syria? Because, you know, ultimately we wish for people to stay in their homes.
Sure. Yeah, this is a very, very important question. Thanks, Susan, for asking me. You know, unity is important in those matters. You guys should educate yourself, really, understand the root cause of the crisis and what caused those refugees to flee their country. I advise you to check a very nice campaign called the Syria campaign. They have amazing stats and resources that you guys can build on, you can do your research on. And Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all those great NGOs. Social media is your weapon. You guys can reach out and raise awareness. You can start petitions, you know, and spread them among your students, your classmates. You can start Avaz campaigns. I'm sure you're aware of Avaz for those of you who are interested in human rights. You can also partner with other schools and form an alliance. It's all ideas, right? I'm being too ambitious, but it is doable in a way. You can mail MPs, you know, a list of demands. You know, you can definitely make a difference. You can organize events to shed light on the crisis and even fundraise. Now it's at home. You can sponsor refugees here and bring those amazing youth as well that are eager to be with you and share this amazing life that we have in Canada.
Thank you, Maher. I was thinking when you guys were playing that game, it would be wonderful to see that game somehow replicated in one of the camps with the Syrian kids about what they know about North America or Canada or Imagine or what they know about their own rights. Maher modestly didn't mention his current project, which is the Syria Film Festival, which just had an amazing run on the weekend at the AGO. And when we were talking about this thing today, he said, you know, you should show some of these short films. So we picked one together, there are several, called Tiny Souls, and it's about one of the camps that Marina has visited, and I think it gives you a good sense of what it's like to live in these camps. It's about 8 or 9 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes for questions from you. So if we can roll Tiny Souls. Thank you for your attention. We have about 10 minutes, 9 minutes for questions. And while you're getting ready for the questions, I just want to ask Maher about the other film that we wanted to show you, Goal.
Goal to Syria, yeah.
Goal to Syria.
Yes.
It's an animated film. You can look it up, Goal to Syria.
Yeah, it's on YouTube, yeah.
It's on YouTube, and it's animated about the rescue efforts in some of the rubble in Syria and what might happen if those children are rescued and they become soccer stars. It's pretty cute. Yes. Questions? Don't be shy. Anything about the area to these two people? That was the campaign.
First of all, thank you guys so much for coming and talking to us today. It was really fantastic. My question is for Marina. So you said that you guys choose refugees from these urban centers. What exactly are these urban centers, and how do you choose these 1% of people you take in as refugees?
That's an excellent question, and it took me a long time to figure out the whole thing. Basically what happens is the UNHCR, all refugees that go into, say, Jordan, register with the UNHCR so that they can get an allocation for food and shelter. Only 15% of them live in that Zatari camp. They would be the poorest. The other 85% would find their way to Amman, and then they would find some cheap place to live with a relative or, you know, in some basement suite somewhere. And those seem to be the refugees that the private sponsoring groups choose, partly because they have the connections to the churches that are helping them out in Amman. The UNHCR keeps a list of what they call vulnerable people. Usually the people on that list are the people that the government takes in. So there's the two streams, the privately sponsored and the government. And so the UNHCR's list is kind of a bit of a mystery, and people are constantly moving up and down this list, and there's about 7,000 names on it. At least there was a month ago when I was there. And most of those people are vulnerable people, so older mothers who are single with a couple kids, and sick people. And they discount single young men that are 20 because they might be combatants and they might not have a good security check in place. So a family like Nisrin's, who is a great family with 4 children but healthy and in Zatari, sadly has a very small chance of being sponsored, though she is no less worthy of coming to Canada and would in fact probably make an excellent resettled refugee than the ones hanging out in Amman, Jordan. So there's a lot of kind of self-selection that goes on in the refugee community and a lot of hierarchies. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again for coming and talking to us today. I have a question for Mr. Azim. So for the past 30, 40 years, we've observed that in the event of a Middle Eastern crisis, Western allies and NATO have always stepped up, most usually in a militaristic fashion. As a native Syrian, do you think this again should be the course of action we should be taking, or should we be trying a different approach?
Yeah, this is a tricky question, assuming that I'm not a politician. So I'm gonna just answer you from my humble opinion, and also the answer of Syrian on the ground as well. So the source of all evil, like we have to speak really politically, really here. The source of all evil is Assad, really. And if you get rid of him, you really eliminate a lot of evils automatically, in a way. He kind of, in the American invasion of Iraq, he sponsored Al-Qaeda, actually, in 2003. So he's kind of equivalent to terrorism, in my opinion. So a no-fly zone is definitely a must to eliminate all the airstrikes, to provide safety to the actual civilians. And having humanitarian shelters inside Syria is really a must. And there is actually a transitionary Syrian government that's based in Turkey. They can definitely be in charge of those liberated areas. So I guess that's my answer. Political solutions, they're really stumbling, and they're not being successful, because there's also a kind of how to say, like the Assad doesn't recognize opposition, and also vice versa. So it's really endless circles. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to speak to us today. My question has to do with the European Union. There's been a lot of controversy in the news over the amount of refugees some European countries are taking. What plan of action do you think the European Union should take, or what action plan should they put in place so that all refugees go to countries evenly, or maybe not, in your opinion?
well, I mean, Europe has the uncontrolled flow, unlike the ones in Jordan sitting in the camps. So they've got 700,000 that have kind of come into Europe. We don't know who they are. There are a lot of young men who there might be suspicions around. Where the flow coming into Canada is much more the flow from the camps, much more registered and checked out. But I personally believe that, and I think Europe solved this, they've done 160,000 as a target of who can be resettled in Europe, and they've divided it up according to population. But I just read a report this week saying that even though they've come up with this solution, guess what? It hasn't actually happened yet, because a lot of the refugees don't want to go to the assigned country, because they want to go to Germany and Sweden. So it's very complicated. And if you're already sitting in Germany and they say, oh, I'm sorry, you were assigned to Poland, get out. They say, forget it, I'm staying in Germany. So it's very complex. But everybody should be doing their piece for sure.
I'm just going to add to that we've seen so much of the European migration this fall and the summer, and it affected our election campaign. And many of us saw the picture of the boy with his face in the sand on the Turkish beach, which really galvanized a lot of support. 750,000 people have come into Europe since January, and 3,400 have drowned trying to do that. Next question, please.
Thank you for speaking here today. My question is, I tend to have a very liberal view, and support Trudeau completely for bringing in Syrian refugees and his decision to not bomb Syria. However, within this school and with a lot of my friends, others tend to have a bit more conservative view, where they do think bombing should happen, and the intake of Syrians should be more restrictive. What are your stances on this situation?
I'll jump in and say that you have to be very clear. They're two completely separate issues. One issue is people who are fleeing the civil war and ISIS in Syria, and then the other issue is whether or not Canada gets involved in the military campaign. But there should in no way be any less support for the 4 million Syrians who are completely, the victims of Islamic terrorism as much as the Parisians are. And I think sometimes we mix up those two concepts, so we have to keep up our support for refugees while we argue out the best way to solve the crisis.
Yeah, thank you.
Maher, do you want to jump?
That's okay.
Okay.
Okay, so this is kind of related to one of the previous questions, but since we have seen Russia's willingness to back the Assad regime, what kind of steps do you think need to be taken by intergovernmental organizations such as the UN, where P5 countries on the Security Council have very conflicting interests? Do you see a way forward, or what kind of steps do you think that the UN or NATO or the EU should be taking to, A, help with the migrant crisis as well as the source of the problem, which is Assad?
Maher? In brief.
Yeah, that's a hard question.
It's really, I think I answered this question, but I'm gonna re-say it. The solution has to come to the decision has to be unified, really, and there has been always talk and demands, but it's not being maybe taking into action for some reason, and there's always kind of obstacles. The no-fly zone is definitely the only way to, end this war, because the biggest damage is, helicopters, explosive barrels, airstrikes. Those have to end. So, the refugee will stop, actually, the crisis would actually stop because people wouldn't leave their home anymore, right? And they can, this will end like the biggest, I think that's all. Yeah.
Thank you.
And one of the things I think we need to keep in mind when we're considering a military response in any conflict is, as after Paris, there was a concerted emphasis on the airstrikes over Syria, which Canada is involved in still, nightly, as is France and the United States, of course. And while, as Maher says, politicians argue about whether that's good or bad, and we have different opinions in this room, I think often of anytime there's more military attack, there are more civilian deaths. So I feel for the Syrians who are under bombardments even more this week because of what happened in Paris, for those who are not in the conflict trying to survive.
I mean, the area where France is bombing, there's 700,000 Syrians, civilians living there. And those actually, they have been poor even, before the conflict started.
We have time for one more question, I think.
Thank you for coming. Considering the media's recent focus on ISIS as opposed to the atrocities of al-Assad's regime, what are some good ways of sort of bypassing the media bias and really getting more of a look into what Assad's regime is doing at the moment?
Well, actually, sorry, whatever we're doing as a Syria Film Festival is actually, that's an initiative. It's going to be individual and smaller group initiative to actually shed a light on what's really going on. And there are so many different campaigns. As I mentioned, Syria campaign is really one way to learn more about what's happening. It's a bit sad that really ISIS is being so popular in the media, where it's actually one of the backers of ISIS is, surprisingly Assad. But remember, whenever you hear ISIS, remember Assad is actually implicit.
I would just urge you to read broadly and go to think tanks that do original research on the ground, like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the same thing the media reads, but you don't have to read what we write about it, just read the original document.
Thank you.
Okay.
As members of the UCC community, we often can be overwhelmed with our own day-to-day challenges. We have classes, practices, assemblies, games, meetings, recitals, homework, cahoots, tests, and exams. It can be easy for us to forget that human beings like you and me are often suffering unimaginable hardship in very insecure places. As we've learned today, millions of people have left their homes in Syria. They are being forced to flee to escape violence, rape, starvation, persecution, and death. In response, Canada has agreed to welcome 25,000 Syrian refugees before the end of this year. Refugees, as we have learned, are people who want to build a better tomorrow in safety, just like you and me. As a faculty member, I feel that Upper Canada College has a moral duty to do something about the Syrian refugee crisis. As a Canadian citizen, I feel that I have an obligation to help Syrian refugees start a new life in Canada, one that is safe, compassionate, and constructive to Canadian society in the future. That is why I'm very happy to announce that Upper Canada College has decided to sponsor a Syrian refugee family. In collaboration with students, old boys, parents, faculty, and staff, we intend to raise money to finance the living costs of a Syrian refugee family for 1 year and to pick them up from the airport, help them find food, clothing, housing, transportation, schools, and jobs, and ultimately help them resettle into Canadian society. So we need your help. Under the leadership of IB2 student Simon Brower, UCC has formed a new club that intends to represent the student body on UCC's sponsorship group. I hope you will consider joining this club to help make a meaningful contribution to an unprecedented crisis that is unfolding before our eyes. It is important to embrace these new families and to share your strengths with them, as they will soon be your neighbor, your colleague, and a fellow citizen who may someday be helping you. I would like to thank our speakers today for helping us understand the gravity of the situation in Syria and the plight of the refugees. I hope you will accept these tokens of our appreciation and for being with us today. May the wind be always at your back.
Thanks, Craig.